things that I think Latin America and other countries can learn from. The first is the experience in a number of indigenous communities in northern Canada, where the communities had the organization and the possibility of engaging in dialogues, often mediated by the state, with the mining industry to ensure that they felt that their interests were being represented in terms of respect for their cultures, in terms of employment, in terms of distribution of the benefits of the mine, and in various other ways. And what in the end happens is it's a win-win for everybody. Obviously, the mining company may be expected to pay more than they otherwise would, but they're still profitable. And at the same time, their costs go down because they have the cooperation of the community rather than community resistance. The communities end up becoming much more self-sufficient. And in fact, what the ultimate goal is that when the mine closes, the communities continue to thrive. Probably the best example of that in particular is something that I saw in the fall, in last October, when I visited a uranium mine near Saskatoon. And think about it, uranium mines, just because of what they're mining, are the most difficult operations in terms of being able to get community buy-in. And in this particular community, all around a uranium mine, what happened is that a dying community, indigenous community, dying in the sense of high levels of violence, high levels of drug abuse and addiction, high levels of youth desertion because they were looking for opportunities. When the mine became functional, what ended up happening is that the community was able to seize the opportunity to develop in the most fundamental way, creating other kinds of industries around the mines, providing other sources of employment, using the resources that the mine made available to, in effect, generate other opportunities to leverage it so that in the end, a uranium company is the hero of the community. Not because of the 300 or 400 jobs it might be directly supplying, but because the resources it's bringing in allows for a multiplier effect in which a community that literally, culturally, economically, and socially was on the verge to begin to thrive. And there are many other examples of that. The second example, at first glance, has nothing at all to do with what we're talking about, but it's where town hall meetings, local government in North America, United States, Canada, works because people go to the meetings, they hold their representatives accountable. Representatives, in turn, have to listen to what their constituents have to say. I mean, it's basic democratic politics. Just because I'm a professor, a famous book by a man named Robert Dahl, Who Governs, was about democratic governance in New Haven, Connecticut. So here we're talking about a university town. This is the home of Yale. He was a Yale professor. And in a town that has privilege, elitism, because Yale University obviously is a bit of an elite university to say the least, in the midst of all sorts of other problems that are associated with a lack of urban development. And so what local government does is it allows, when it works really well and democratically, is it provides the forum, it provides the opportunity for different interests to come together to try and legitimately influence the decisions and the outcomes, to discuss them, to debate them at the local level. And I think it's really, in the end, even though at the time, people didn't think of it as multi-stakeholder dialogues, we still tend to think of it as democratic politics, but rather than multi-sector dialogues, that's what it's all about. And the legitimacy and the effectiveness of local government comes from the fact that it brings in the different stakeholders, listens to them, comes up with some compromise so that in the end, even if you're not happy, at least you don't feel taken advantage of, you don't feel excluded, you don't feel marginalized. And obviously I'm talking more about disadvantaged, poor groups, but the same thing is true for businesses. We hear this all the time in the newspapers. If local governments or national governments create contexts in which it's unfriendly for businesses to invest, they're not going to invest. And so when we talk about multi-stakeholder dialogues, we're talking about the inclusion not only of the historically excluded, like indigenous peoples in many countries, but also groups that often in the past tended to dominate. So my research as an academic is on civil society. And unlike a lot of my colleagues, I think business organizations, chambers of commerce in particular, are often a big part of civil society. The problem in many countries, some would argue much worse today than 20 years ago, is that they become the only actor. And that's the problem. It's not that they're part of the decision making. It's not that their influence is completely marginalized. It's that they're the only player. And so what we need to do is come up with democratic balances, and local municipal governments, when they work really, really well, do that in effect, even if we call them something different. Local chambers of commerce, community organizations, neighborhood groups, religious groups, all sorts of different actors who have something to gain or to lose by the decisions taken by city councils can be heard, are heard, or feel that they're heard. None predominates, at least over time, on a variety of decisions, so that everybody feels included and listened to. And that when things don't go their way, they recognize the legitimacy of the process and retain the hope and the expectations that next time it might go their way. That there's a basic respect and a basic opportunity for all actors to equally benefit. It becomes, the classic win-win situation, and that in itself is sustainable, because it's the process that sustains it. It's the buy-in of the different stakeholders over time that sustains it, and it reflects simply the fact that people are able to express themselves with the satisfaction that somebody in a position to take decisions is listening and taking that into account more often than not.